The scream tore through the howling wind. But by the time Quinlan Caldwell turned his horse around, the wagon was already disappearing into the white fury of the blizzard, leaving nothing behind but a dark shape crumpled in the snow. He had been riding hard for Concord, California, trying to beat the unseasonable storm that had swept down from the mountains in late November of 1878, when he heard that desperate cry. Now, squinting through the driving snow, he could barely make out the form of someone lying motionless on the frozen ground. His gelding, Thunder, protested as he urged the animal forward, but Quinlan pressed on, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was no ordinary California weather. The freak blizzard had caught everyone by surprise, transforming the familiar landscape into a treacherous white wilderness. As he drew closer, he realized the figure was a woman, her dark hair already dusted with snow, her traveling cloak inadequate for the brutal cold. She was conscious but shaking violently, her lips taking on a bluish tint. Quinlan dismounted immediately, nearly losing his footing on the icy ground. "Madam, can you hear me?" he shouted over the wind, kneeling beside her, her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of storm clouds. "They left me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I told them I was too sick to continue and they just left me." Rage flared hot in Quinlan's chest, but he pushed it aside. There would be time for anger later. Right now, this woman would die if he did not act fast. "I am getting you out of here," he said firmly, already shrugging off his heavy wool coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. "Can you stand?" she tried, but her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, Quinlan scooped her into his arms, shocked by how light she felt, how fragile. He managed to hoist her onto Thunder's saddle, then pulled himself up behind her, wrapping one arm securely around her waist while the other gripped the reins. "Stay with me," he urged as her head lolled back against his chest. "What is your name?" "Katherine," she murmured. "Katherine Vaughn." "Well, Katherine Vaughn, I am Quinlan Caldwell, and I promise you, I am not leaving you out here to freeze. We have about 2 miles to an old line shack I know. Can you hold on that long?" She nodded weakly, and he felt her hands grip his arm with what little strength she had left. The journey through the blinding snow was nightmarish. Quinlan could barely see 3 feet in front of them, relying more on Thunder's instincts and his own memory of the terrain than actual visibility. Catherine's shivering had grown more violent, and he held her tighter, trying to share what little warmth his body could provide. When the dark outline of the line shack finally emerged from the white chaos, relief flooded through him so powerfully he nearly sagged in the saddle. He dismounted carefully, keeping Katherine steady, then lifted her down. Her legs would not support her at all now, so he carried her to the door, kicking it open with his boot. The interior was sparse but dry, with a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a single cot against the far wall. Quinlan laid Katherine on the cot, then rushed back outside to tend to Thunder. He led the horse into the small lean-to attached to the shack, removing the saddle and rubbing the animal down as quickly as possible before throwing a blanket over him and securing the door. Back inside, he found Katherine curled on her side, still trembling uncontrollably. Quinlan immediately went to work on the stove, grateful to find a small supply of dry wood stacked in the corner. Within minutes, he had a fire crackling, its warmth beginning to chase away the deadly chill. But Katherine was not improving. Her lips were still blue, her skin frighteningly pale. Quinlan had seen frostbite and hypothermia before, had lost a fellow ranch hand to exposure one brutal winter in Montana. He knew what needed to be done, even as his sense of propriety recoiled. "Katherine," he said, sitting on the edge of the cot and touching her shoulder gently. "Your clothes are wet. You need to get out of them or you will not survive this night. Her eyes opened, unfocused and glazed. So cold, she whispered. I know, but we have to warm you up properly. I am going to turn around and tend the fire. Can you manage to change? There are some old blankets in that trunk over there. He moved away, busying himself with stoking the fire and deliberately keeping his back turned, listening for any sound of movement. Several long minutes passed before he heard a soft thump, followed by a whimper of pain. Katherine. I cannot, she said, and he could hear tears in her voice. My fingers will not work. Quinlan closed his eyes briefly, then made his decision. I am going to help you, but I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not look at anything I should not, and I will not speak of this to anyone ever. All right. A pause, then a tremulous, all right. He turned, keeping his gaze fixed firmly on her face as he helped her sit up. Her traveling dress was indeed soaked through, the heavy fabric freezing in places. With careful, respectful movements, he helped her out of the dress, then the layers beneath, averting his eyes and working mostly by feel. When she was down to her chemise, he wrapped her tightly in 2 thick blankets from the trunk, then added his own dry shirt for good measure. Better, he asked, settling her back on the cot. A little, she admitted, though she was still shaking. Quinlan pulled one of the chairs close to the cot and sat down, monitoring her carefully. As the room gradually warmed, color slowly began returning to her cheeks. He found some old coffee grounds and a dented pot, melting snow in it over the stove and brewing a weak but hot drink. Here, he said, helping her sit up and holding the cup to her lips. Small sips. The hot liquid seemed to revive her somewhat, and after she had drunk half the cup, her eyes finally focused on him properly. You saved my life, she said softly. Anyone would have done the same. No, Katherine said, her voice stronger now. No, they would not have. The people I was traveling with certainly did not. Quinlan felt that anger return. Tell me what happened. She took a shaky breath, her hands gripping the blankets tightly. I was traveling with a family from Sacramento, the Hendersons. They said they were heading to a settlement east of Concord and offered to take me along for a small fee. I am a school teacher, you see, and I had been promised a position in a town near there. But then this storm came out of nowhere, and I became ill. The cold made everything worse, and I could not stop coughing. Mrs. Henderson said I was slowing them down, that they needed to reach shelter before dark. I begged them to just let me rest in the wagon, but Mr. Henderson stopped, told me to get out, and when I refused, he physically pulled me out and threw me into the snow. Her voice broke on the last words, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Quinlan felt his jaw clench so hard it ached. That is unconscionable, he said quietly. No decent person abandons someone to die in a blizzard. I thought I was going to die, Katherine whispered. I tried to walk to find shelter, but I could barely see anything, and then I just fell. I could not get back up. Everything was so cold, and I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. But it did not end, Quinlan said gently. You are alive, and you are safe now. She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his weathered face, the dark hair that fell across his forehead, the honest concern in his hazel eyes. Why did you come back? You must have been trying to get to safety yourself. I heard you scream, he said simply. I could not just ride on knowing someone needed help. A fresh wave of tears came, but these seemed different, born of relief and gratitude rather than despair. Quinlan found a relatively clean cloth and offered it to her, feeling awkward but wanting to help somehow. As night fell and the storm continued to rage outside, Quinlan prepared a simple meal from the supplies in his saddlebag, some jerky, hardtack, and a few strips of dried fruit. It was not much, but Katherine ate gratefully, her strength clearly returning with warmth and food. "Tell me about yourself," she said as they ate. "Are you a rancher?" "I work as a ranch foreman," Quinlan replied. "Or I did, up in Montana. I am heading to Concord to start my own operation. Saved up for years to buy some land, finally have enough to make it happen." "That must be exciting," Katherine said. "Starting fresh in a new place." "And terrifying," he admitted with a slight smile. "But I am ready for it. I have been working other people's land since I was 15, learning everything I could. Now it is time to build something of my own." 15 is young to start such hard work. "My father died when I was 14, Quinlan explained. "My mother passed when I was born, so it was just him and me. After he was gone, I had to make my own way. A rancher named Thomas McAllister took a chance on a scrawny kid who knew nothing about cattle, taught me everything. He passed on 3 years ago, left me a small inheritance. That, combined with my savings, was enough to buy the land in California." Katherine's expression softened. "He must have thought highly of you." "He was like a father to me," Quinlan said quietly. "I miss him every day." They talked long into the night, the conversation flowing with surprising ease despite their strange circumstances. Katherine told him about growing up in San Francisco, the daughter of a merchant who had lost everything in a bad investment, forcing her to seek employment as a teacher. She spoke of her love of books, her dreams of maybe one day opening a school of her own, her loneliness in a city full of people who seemed to look right through her. Quinlan found himself captivated by her intelligence, her wit, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about teaching children to read. And Katherine, warm now and safe, discovered that this cowboy who had saved her life was far more than just a rough frontiersman. He was thoughtful, kind, and when he smiled, which was rare, it transformed his entire face. The storm blew itself out sometime before dawn, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. Quinlan woke from an uncomfortable doze in the chair to find pale sunlight streaming through the gaps in the shutters. Katherine was still sleeping, her breathing deep and even, her color good. He stepped outside to check on Thunder and survey the damage. The landscape was breathtaking in its harsh beauty, everything covered in a thick blanket of white. But Quinlan knew the danger had not passed. The temperature was still well below freezing, and they had limited supplies. He needed to get Katherine to Concord, where she could recover properly, and he could see about finding those Hendersons and having a very serious conversation with them about common decency. When he returned inside, Katherine was awake, sitting up and looking much improved. "Good morning," she said, managing a smile. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Sore, but alive, thanks to you." She paused, looking down at the blankets. "I need to thank you properly for what you did. You saved my life at great risk to your own, and you treated me with nothing but respect and kindness. I will never forget that." Quinlan felt heat rise in his cheeks, unused to such direct gratitude. "You do not need to thank me. I am just glad I heard you in time." "Still, thank you. Not just for saving me, but for being a good man. That seems increasingly rare these days." They spent the morning preparing for the journey to Concord. Katherine's dress had dried by the fire, though it was wrinkled and worse for wear. Quinlan gave her his spare shirt to wear under it for extra warmth, and fashioned a better wrap for her head and shoulders from one of the blankets. The ride to Concord took most of the day, Thunder moving carefully through the deep snow. Quinlan kept Katherine seated in front of him again, his arm around her waist, telling himself it was purely practical even as he found himself intensely aware of her presence, the way she leaned back against him, trusting him to keep her safe. They talked more as they rode, sharing stories and laughter, the conversation never seeming to run dry. Quinlan learned that Katherine was 22, just 3 years younger than him. She learned that he had never been in love, had been too focused on survival and saving money to think much about romance. She admitted, somewhat shyly, that she had been courted once by a banker's son in San Francisco, but he had wanted a decorative wife to host parties, not a woman with her own dreams and ambitions. "He told me I read too much," Katherine said with a bitter laugh. "Can you imagine? Too much reading, as if such a thing were possible." "Then he was a fool," Quinlan said firmly. "A woman with education and intelligence is worth 10 decorative wives." He felt her relax against him, heard the smile in her voice when she said, "I am beginning to think Montana ranchers are far superior to San Francisco bankers." When Concord finally came into view, Quinlan felt an unexpected reluctance. Getting Katherine to safety had been his single focus for the past day and night, but now that they were arriving, he realized this meant saying goodbye. The thought left a hollow feeling in his chest that surprised him with its intensity. He took her directly to the town's small boarding house, run by a kindly widow named Mrs. Patterson, who took one look at Katherine's condition and immediately sprang into action, ushering her inside with promises of a hot bath, warm food, and a comfortable bed. "You will stay in town for a few days, will you not?" Katherine asked Quinlan at the door, her hand on his arm. "I would like to see you again, to thank you properly when I am not half frozen and barely coherent." "I have business with the land office," Quinlan said. "I will be staying at the hotel for at least a week, getting things settled." "Then I will see you soon," Katherine said, and the warmth in her smile made his heart do something complicated in his chest. Over the next few days, Quinlan threw himself into the business of establishing his new life. He met with the land office, finalized the purchase of 200 acres just outside of town, and began making lists of everything he would need to build a functioning ranch. But through it all, his thoughts kept drifting back to Katherine Vaughn, to the sound of her laugh, the intelligence in her eyes, the courage she had shown in the face of near death. He called on her at the boarding house on the third day, hat in hand, suddenly as nervous as a schoolboy. Mrs. Patterson showed him to the small parlor where Katherine was sitting by the window, reading a book. She looked up when he entered, and her face lit up in a way that made his breath catch. "Quinlan," she said, rising, "I was hoping you would come." They sat together, talking easily, and Quinlan found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone: his fears about starting the ranch, his doubts about whether he was truly ready, his deep loneliness over the years working from ranch to ranch with no place to really call home. Katherine listened with her whole attention, then reached out and took his hand. "You will succeed," she said firmly. "You know how I know? Because you are the kind of man who rides into a blizzard to save a stranger. That kind of determination and character does not fail." "I am glad you have such faith in me," Quinlan said softly, very aware of her hand in his. "I wish I had as much myself." "Then borrow mine until your own catches up," Katherine suggested with a gentle smile. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that night in the line shack. Quinlan squeezed her hand gently. "I would like to call on you properly," he said, "if you are agreeable." "I am very agreeable," Katherine replied, her cheeks flushing prettily. And so began a courtship that was the talk of Concord within a week. Quinlan called on Katherine every day, taking her for walks around town, sharing meals at the boarding house, sitting together in the evening while she read aloud and he listened to the sound of her voice. Mrs. Patterson proved to be a romantic at heart, always ensuring they had privacy while still maintaining propriety. Katherine, for her part, found herself falling deeper in love with every passing day. Quinlan was unlike any man she had ever known, honest to his core, unfailingly kind, and possessed of a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had ever felt in her life. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before, as though he understood every part of her, even the parts she kept hidden from the world. A week into their courtship, Quinlan took Katherine to see his land. They rode out together on a clear December morning, the unseasonable snow already melting under California's winter sun. When they reached his property, Quinlan helped Katherine down from her horse and stood with her, looking out over the rolling hills and grassland. "This is it," he said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. 200 acres. There is a creek that runs through the northern section, good grazing land, shelter from the wind. I am going to build the house on that rise there where you can see everything. Katherine stood beside him, imagining the future he was describing. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "You must be so excited." "I am," Quinlan admitted, "and terrified, and wondering if I am completely mad for thinking I can do this alone." He paused, then turned to look at her directly. "Katherine, I know we have not known each other long. Just over a week, which seems insane when I say it out loud. But I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. These past days have been the happiest of my life, and the thought of you leaving Concord, of going to that teaching position, makes me feel like I am losing something precious before I even really had it." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I am saying I am falling in love with you," Quinlan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am saying that I know it is fast, probably too fast, but I cannot help how I feel. I am saying that when I imagine building a life here, I cannot imagine it without you in it." Tears sprang to Katherine's eyes. "I am falling in love with you too," she said. "I have been since that night in the line shack when you gave me your coat and promised not to leave me. Maybe even before that when I heard your voice through the storm and knew I was going to survive." Quinlan reached out and cupped her face gently in his work-roughened hands. "Then stay," he said. "Stay in Concord. Stay with me. Not right away," he added quickly. "I know we need to do this properly with a proper courtship and engagement, but stay, Katherine. Give us a chance to build something together." "Yes," Katherine breathed. "Yes, I will stay." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise of everything to come. When they broke apart, both were smiling, joy radiating from them like sunlight. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity and deepening love. Katherine took a position as a teacher in Concord's small schoolhouse, quickly becoming beloved by her students and their parents. Quinlan threw himself into building his ranch, spending long days clearing land, constructing a barn and house, and purchasing his first small herd of cattle. And every spare moment they spent together, their love growing stronger with each passing day. Quinlan proposed formally in March, on a warm evening as they walked along the creek on his property. He had carved her a ring from a piece of oak wood, simple but beautiful, promising to replace it with gold when he could afford it. Katherine slipped it onto her finger and told him she never wanted any other ring, that this one represented everything she loved about him: his craftsmanship, his thoughtfulness, his ability to create something beautiful with his own two hands. They were married in June of 1879, in Concord's small church with half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Quinlan wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, his hands shaking slightly as he slipped a gold band onto her finger. He had replaced the wooden ring after all, though Katherine kept it in a small box as her most treasured possession. The wedding was simple but joyful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quinlan kissed Katherine with all the love in his heart, earning applause and whistles from the assembled guests. They honeymooned at the ranch, in the house Quinlan had built with his own hands. It was modest, just 4 rooms to start, but Katherine had never loved a place more. She had sewn curtains for the windows, braided rugs for the floors, filled the kitchen with supplies and the bedroom with soft linens. It was home in a way nowhere else had ever been because it was theirs, built with love and hope for the future. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The ranch demanded constant work, long hours in all weather. Money was tight, especially in the beginning. There were times when Katherine went to bed with her hands sore from mending, her back aching from hours of work, wondering if they would make it. But through it all, their love sustained them. Quinlan would come in from the fields, dirty and exhausted, and still take the time to ask about her day, to listen to stories about her students, to hold her close and whisper how much he loved her. Katherine learned to help with the ranch work, feeding cattle, mending fences, riding alongside her husband as they checked the herd. They were partners in every sense of the word, building a life together with determination and devotion. By their 2nd anniversary, the ranch was thriving. Quinlan's careful management and Katherine's frugal housekeeping had paid off, and they were able to hire 2 hands to help with the work, easing the burden considerably. Katherine had become known as one of the finest teachers in the region, with parents sometimes traveling considerable distances to enroll their children in her school. And on a warm September evening in 1881, Katherine told Quinlan she was expecting their first child. The joy on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy, before carefully setting her down and dropping to his knees to press his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he whispered. "This is your father. I promise to love you and protect you every day of my life." Katherine ran her fingers through his hair, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "We are going to be a family," she said softly. "We already are a family," Quinlan replied, standing and pulling her close. "But yes, an even bigger one. God, Katherine, I cannot believe how lucky I am. How did I get so lucky?" "I think it started with riding into a blizzard to save a stranger," Katherine said with a smile. Their son was born in May of 1882, a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and his mother's gray eyes. They named him Thomas, after the rancher who had been like a father to Quinlan. Holding his son for the first time, Quinlan wept openly, overwhelmed by the love and responsibility he felt. Katherine watched her husband with their child and felt her heart might burst from happiness. This man who had saved her life had given her so much more: a home, a purpose, a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible, and now a family. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas was joined by a daughter, Emma, 2 years later, and another son, James, 3 years after that. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the area. Katherine eventually reduced her teaching to part-time, wanting to spend more time with her children but unable to give up her passion for education entirely. Through it all, Quinlan and Katherine's love only deepened. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, had built a life from nothing but determination and devotion, had created a home filled with laughter and love. On their 10th anniversary, Quinlan took Katherine back to the line shack where he had saved her life. It was still standing, though weathered and abandoned. They stood together in the doorway, looking at the small space that had sheltered them that terrible night. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had not heard me?" Katherine asked quietly. "If you had not come back?" Quinlan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every day," he admitted. "And every day I thank God that I did. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine Caldwell. You and our children, the life we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed of having." "I love you," Katherine said, turning in his arms to look up at him. "I have loved you since the moment you wrapped me in your coat and promised not to leave me, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." He kissed her then, deep and tender, a kiss that held a decade of shared joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, passion and partnership. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the California sky in shades of gold and pink. In the distance, they could see the house, larger now than the modest structure Quinlan had first built, with smoke rising from the chimney and lamplight glowing in the windows. Their children would be waiting for them, cared for by the housekeeper they had been able to afford for the last few years. As they approached, Thomas ran out to meet them, now 8 years old and already showing signs of having his father's build and his mother's quick mind. Emma and James followed, their laughter ringing out across the evening air. Quinlan dismounted and scooped up his daughter, while Katherine slid from her horse and caught James as he launched himself at her. Thomas took the horse's reins like the responsible oldest child he was, leading them toward the barn. "Did you have a good ride?" Emma asked, her small hands framing her father's face. "The best," Quinlan said, his eyes meeting Katherine's over their daughter's head. "Your mother and I were just remembering how we met." "In the blizzard," James said importantly. He had heard the story 100 times and never tired of it. "Papa saved Mama from freezing." "He did," Katherine confirmed, reaching out to take Quinlan's hand as they walked toward the house together, their children surrounding them. "He saved me in every way a person can be saved." That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Quinlan and Katherine sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Katherine asked softly. "In the line shack, when I was so cold I thought I might die." "I said a lot of things that night," Quinlan replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "You said this is not how it ends," Katherine reminded him. "You said I was alive and safe." "I remember." "You were right," she said, tilting her head to look up at him. "That was not an ending at all. It was a beginning, the beginning of everything that mattered." Quinlan kissed her forehead, then her lips, soft and sweet. "The best beginning," he agreed, "and we are nowhere near the end of our story yet." The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew, Thomas eventually taking on more responsibility at the ranch, showing a natural gift for working with cattle and the land. Emma proved to have her mother's love of learning and became a teacher herself, working alongside Katherine at the school. James, the youngest, inherited his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's quick intelligence, constantly asking questions and exploring every corner of the ranch. Quinlan and Katherine grew older together, their hair graying, lines appearing on their faces, but their love never diminishing. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodbye every morning and hello every evening. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from across the county. As Quinlan stood to give a toast, he looked at Katherine and felt the same surge of love and gratitude he had felt that night in the blizzard when he had first held her in his arms. 25 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, I was a man alone with nothing but a dream and enough money to buy some land. Then a freak blizzard changed my life forever. I found a woman abandoned in the snow, and in saving her life, she saved mine. Katherine Caldwell is the finest person I have ever known, strong, intelligent, kind, brave, and more beautiful today than the day I married her. These 25 years have been the greatest blessing of my life, and if I live to be 100, I will spend every remaining day grateful that I heard her cry out in that storm, grateful that I turned back, grateful that she chose to build a life with me. There was not a dry eye in the house as Katherine rose and kissed her husband to thunderous applause. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I was alone and dying in a blizzard," she said simply. "And this man, this incredible man, risked his own life to save mine. He gave me everything: his warmth, his protection, his love, his name, his life. Every happiness I have known has come from that moment when he chose to ride into the storm instead of away from it. Quinlan Caldwell, you are my hero, my partner, my love, and my home. Here is to 25 more years, and then 25 after that." They kissed again, and the celebration continued long into the night, filled with music and dancing and laughter. But eventually, as the evening wound down, Quinlan and Katherine slipped away, walking hand in hand back to their house under a canopy of stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Quinlan asked suddenly. "Giving up your plans, staying in Concord instead of going to that teaching position you had been promised?" Katherine stopped walking and turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Quinlan Caldwell, in all our years together, have I ever once seemed like a woman filled with regret?" He smiled, that rare, transforming smile she loved so much. "No," he admitted. "Then why would you ask such a foolish question?" she teased gently. "My life with you, our children, our home, our love, this is everything I ever wanted and more than I dared to dream. If I could go back to that day in the blizzard, knowing everything that would come after, I would not change a single thing. Except perhaps I would have those Hendersons arrested for abandonment." Quinlan laughed, pulling her close. "Mrs. Patterson told me they came back through Concord a few months after we married. Apparently word had gotten around about what they did, and nobody would serve them at the stores or offer them lodging. They left town within an hour." "Good," Katherine said with satisfaction. "Some actions have consequences." They continued walking, and Quinlan found his thoughts drifting back, as they so often did, to that terrible, wonderful day when everything changed. He thought about the split-second decision to turn back when he heard that scream. How easily he could have convinced himself he had imagined it, could have kept riding toward safety. He thought about finding Katherine in the snow, about the long, cold ride to the line shack, about the way she had looked at him when she woke up warm and safe. "What are you thinking about?" Katherine asked, as if she could hear his thoughts. "About how different my life would be if I had not heard you that day," Quinlan said honestly. "This house would be emptier, lonelier. I probably would have succeeded with the ranch, but what would it have mattered? I would have had no one to share it with, no children to pass it on to, no partner to help me build something meaningful. You gave me purpose, Katherine. You gave me a reason beyond just survival." "We gave each other purpose," Katherine corrected gently. "I was lost before you, Quinlan. Not just in that blizzard, but in my life. I was going through the motions, taking a teaching position because it was what I was supposed to do, not because I was passionate about it. You showed me what it meant to truly live, to build something with someone, to be part of something larger than myself. We saved each other." They reached the house and stood on the porch, looking back at the land spread out before them, silvered by moonlight. Their land, their home, their legacy. "Do you think the children understand how lucky we are?" Quinlan asked softly. "I think they will when they fall in love themselves," Katherine replied. "Until then, we just keep showing them. Keep showing them what real love looks like: partnership, respect, support, Passion that lasts not just months but decades. That is the best gift we can give them. They went inside, to the bedroom they had shared for 25 years, and held each other close. Two people who had been strangers caught in a storm and had become each other's entire world. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Thomas married a local rancher's daughter and took over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Emma married a teacher from Sacramento and continued her mother's legacy of education. James became a lawyer, using his sharp mind to help people in need, always remembering the story of how his father had saved his mother. Quinlan and Katherine grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never wavering. They still took walks around the property, though shorter ones now. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands, still kissed goodnight every single night. On their 50th anniversary, the family gathered again, 3 generations coming together to celebrate a love that had started in the most unlikely of circumstances and had grown into something legendary. Stories were told and retold: the blizzard, the line shack, the courtship, the wedding, the building of the ranch, the births of children and grandchildren. Quinlan, now 75, stood with difficulty to make a toast. Katherine, 72 and still beautiful in his eyes, smiled up at him with all the love in her heart. 50 years, Quinlan said, his voice not as strong as it once was but still filled with emotion. 50 years since I married the woman I pulled from a blizzard. 50 years of partnership, of love, of building a life together. I have never regretted a single day, not one moment. Katherine Caldwell, you are the love of my life, my best friend, my greatest adventure. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for every day since. Katherine rose, taking his hand, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for riding into the storm, she said simply. Thank you for every moment of these 50 years. You are my everything, Quinlan Caldwell. Always have been, always will be. They kissed, surrounded by the family they had created, the legacy of that single choice to turn back into a blizzard and save a stranger's life. Quinlan Caldwell passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 78, with Katherine holding his hand. She followed him just 6 months after, unable and unwilling to live in a world without her beloved husband. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, 2 souls who had found each other in the most desperate of circumstances and had built a love story for the ages. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, each one knowing the story of how it all began with a scream in a blizzard, a cowboy who rode toward danger instead of away from it, and a love that proved stronger than any storm. And sometimes, on winter evenings when the wind howled and snow fell on the California hills, those who lived on the land swore they could see 2 figures walking hand in hand through the twilight, still together, still in love, forever bound by the choice made in a moment of crisis that changed 2 lives and created a legacy that would endure for all time.